Hello, hello. We are super excited that you have joined us at the last part of our second day. We have a great hour in store for you. I'm very excited to introduce you to Dr. Jamila Lyiscott, aka Dr. J. She is a community engaged scholar, a nationally renowned speaker, and she's the author of Black Appetite, White Food: Issues of Race, Voice, and Justice Within and Beyond the Classroom. She currently serves as an assistant professor of social justice education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she's the co-founder and co-director of the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research. Dr. J is most well known for being featured on TED.com. I've seen those, where her video, 3 Ways to Speak English, has been viewed over 4.5 million times, and for her commissioned TED Talk 2053 in response to the inauguration of the 45th occupant of the White House. She is a renowned speaker throughout the nation, where she works closely with youth, educators, and communities towards racial healing, equity, and justice. Dr. J's scholarship and activism work together help her explore, asset, and defend the value of Black life globally. As a testament to her commitment to educational justice for youth of color, she is a founder and co-director of the Ciphers for Justice program, apprenticing New York City high school youth, incarcerated youth, and educators into research and activism through hip hop, spoken word, and media literacy. Dr. J serves as a co-editor of the highly acclaimed Journal of Equity and Excellence in Education and holds faculty fellowships at the University of Notre Dame, Teachers College, Columbia University. She is the recipient of the 2019 Outstanding Public Communication of Education Research Award and the 2019 Scholar, Activist, and Community Advocacy. It is my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. J.
Thank you so much. I want to first begin by expressing what a distinct honor it is to be among you, to be in this sphere of equity. It's very clear to me that we live in a society where the work of equity and justice is not a priority of all people. And so to the degree that I'm able to be in community with people who are committed to this work, I am moved, I'm inspired, and my call is deepened and affirmed. And so I just want to start with expressing that gratitude and just spend a little time talking about the intersections of my experiences and my work as a scholar activist, as a human, as a Black woman walking through this world, and how that all shows up in conversation where we think about language, race, and power under the title, How Broken English Made Me Whole. And I want to be clear that, conversation actually not for everybody. These conversations are not for those who are showing up to the work of performative justice or performative allyship. This conversation belongs to those who are committed to the undoing and dismantling the systems of harm that continue to perpetuate inequity in our society, with the understanding cost, with the understanding that revolution is urgent and essential, and with the understanding that we can and must dream of a world that's better than one that we have today. And so I want to have this conversation about how broken English made me whole with a picture of my grandfather. He's so handsome, right? I start with this picture of my grandfather. He's in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's standing next to the costume that he designed for Trinidad Carnival. Trinidad Carnival has a function its root in the French oppression of Trinidadian peoples. And so the African people that were at the time that were forced into oppression by the French and colonizers and enslavers created Carnival in response to the masquerade balls that the would hold. and wouldn't allow the Black and brown people in the land to attend. And so what would happen then is that they created a parallel celebration. And when you created these tombs, they would call it plays. And my grandfather participated in this tradition. He carved with his own 2 hands. In the upper right corner, what you'll see is the steel pan, which is known to be the only major instrument to be created in the 20th century, also from Trinidad and Tobago. The steel pan was created from industrial waste and oil bins and dust bins. And it represents the power of something that has song, even when everyone rendered broken, right? What does it mean to understand the power? If you've ever heard a steel band orchestra, if you've ever heard them play, it's bewildering that these instruments were created out of industries. And I be that beauty because here's a picture of like a more modern day carnival costume that evokes a deep sense of pride and joy and all the things within me to know that my people could never be standardized, that my people could never fit into anyone's box, federal standards or anyone's testing, because this kind of genius is transcendent. And I start here with my personal narrative, with my personal testimony of the joy, the genius, the resilience, and the power that comes from my family and my in the spirit of Dr. Goli Muhammad's Black and brown folks. We need to start with joy and genius, particularly when it comes to the conversation around white supremacy, when it comes to conversations about racism and inequity. These are pain mechanisms that operate in our everyday lives. And if we're not careful to start with joy and genius, then what happens is we trap us into this narrative of trauma. We become most like the lesson for many white people to learn. The gruesome our trauma becomes a tale, becomes a story, and we start and stop there. But just as Black people did not start with slavery, understand that Black and brown people in our world do not start in trauma and oppression. And so in there is joining in the legacy of many people who have refused the way that white supremacy continues to seeks to circumscribe our power, seeks to limit our joy and our capacity to live fully the power of our humanity. And so I want to just play this video by Uzo Adaba just to highlight that a little bit more as we enter into this conversation.
My family named me Amaka. That's my full name. It means the road is good. Isn't that a beautiful name? Thanks, Mom. For my birthday. Oza Amaka. But I grew up in a small New England town, and there weren't a lot of Nigerian Americans living in my region. And I would have teachers or anyone, neighbors, try and say my name, and it would be Azumeka, Uzamaka, Uza, any version that they could think of other than Uzamaka. So I came home from school one day, and my mom was cooking the kitchen. She is wont to do, the mother of 5 children. And I said to her, "Mommy, can I ask you a question?" She said, I said, "Can you call me Zoe?" And she stopped and gave that mother look that only mothers know and have, and said, "Why?" And I said, "Ozamaka." And she looked at me and she said, "If they can learn to say Tchaikovsky and Michelangelo and Dostoevsky, then they can learn to say Ozamaka." And I never asked her again. And what is amazing now, standing in my woman in my is my name for a second and what's behind.
Period, right? I wouldn't change my name for anything. This video alongside the quote of Gloria Anzaldúa, who wrote Borderlands La Frontera, thinking about what it meant to live at the Mexican-American border and have the violence of the land and the violence, the identities of the people imposed. And she says, as long as I have to accommodate the English speakers, rather than having them accommodate me, my tongue will be illegitimate. I will no longer be made feel ashamed of existing. I will have my voice. And so this conversation about refusal to accommodate those who will not learn your name, embrace the fullness of who you are. Although in many instances, what we canonize in school, especially in our society, we know that there are complex things. Make sure to accommodate the examples given by Uzo. And so this level of refusal and power resonates deeply with me. And the video that was noted earlier, 3 Ways to Speak, and where I enter this conversation from a deeply experiential place. As someone who navigates African-American English, navigates Creolized English, and the size or white practices that have been imposed on me by institutions. I'm calling out the fact that I was affirmed by someone for speaking in standardized English with the understanding that my being, quote, articulate for speaking in standardized English, that I was being read as intellectual and worthy of something I would want read as if I were heard speaking in my hood in American English, or I were heard speaking with my family in Trinidad and Tobago. Right? And so at the time that I wrote this poem, when I was actually 19 years old, I really wanted to understand, what was that calculation? What is the way language is racialized? Where did I internalize the logic and the meaning that I needed to switch in out of different myself in order to be read in a particular way, and why? A lot of these questions started coming up into my experience, and then it deepened my journey towards seeking out those answers. An unapologetic assertion of refusing to change your name, of refusing to translate palatable to whiteness, of refusing to engage in erasure and assimilation in a place that performs integration, is not divorced from the social realities that we see all of our screens and our society today, these social realities, right? That were affected by the insurrectionists at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, is a deep symbol of anti-Black and should be America's deepest shame, the monument to it, right? And so the kind of psychic violence that this is meant to invoke is something that folks would like to write off as just a few extremes in some pockets of America. But I wanna assert the proverbial noose that exists in our pedagogies, our curriculum, our policies, and our norms are noose that seek to stifle the breath, the genius, the joy, the identities out of Black and brown students in the name of white supremacy. A symbol that says, you know, you better know your place. And so I don't want us to take this very literal, very overt act of racism and write it off as something that we're not complicit in if we're not actively acting against the way that these things manifest itself every single day in our schools, our school districts, our classrooms, under our watch. Similarly, the uptick in anti-Asian violence that we've been seeing, the level of erasure that occurs when you steal the lives of people and just had a bad day instead of embedding this into the systemic construct of white supremacy, is the landscape that we're existing within, right? This is the landscape. We cannot divorce. We cannot have this conversation about pedagogy. We cannot have this conversation about educational justice in class and schools without the deep consideration for the socio-political landscape that informs what's happening in our classrooms, right? And so this level of erasure, this level of white supremacist violence is something that, again, has its parallels. In 2009, Texas State Representative Betty Brown asked publicly, like usually these things are like leaked texts, but she asked publicly for Asian Americans to adopt names that are easier for Americans to deal with. And I have here Betty Brown versus you, because at the Brave New Voices poetry slam, I heard a young man by the name of Brian Yu share a poem in direct response to Betty Brown's request. And I'm going to share that poem with you right now. He said, Texas State Representative Betty Brown, as you sat during House testimony and that Asian Americans should adopt names that are, quote, easier for Americans to deal with, did you really expect it all to be that simple? Like if an ethnic group consists of a people with names like roads navigable for your sports utility tongues, then the answer is as clear as pressing the red button, flattening the contours of our language with the decisiveness of nuclear until Hiroshima and Nagasaki become Harry and Nancy. What desolate scene of mushroom cloud misery will smolder in the aftermath? Will the shows of our birth names burn into the sidewalks of our souls like bodies twisted in horror? Will our names pulverize into the dust whence we came? Maybe you thought that we would kneel silently before our broken altars and burn our names like incense offerings to ancestors we have long forgotten. But Betty, know that our names burn brilliantly. They fill the canvas of the night like stars, yet you think that translating the night sky is as simple as the instructions on the back of chopstick wrappers you have yet to master. Like we are merely fortune cookies, yellow exteriors cracked open to reveal our destiny written in English, forgetting that in every American history textbook, footnotes run desperately across the bottom of each page, like the bloody footprints of immigrants buried under skyscrapers, of English text shadowing the contributions of our people. Yet we have given so much to this country, built your railroads with our backs, ironed your clothes with our palms, painted your nails with blood, and as if our bodies were not enough, you demand our names, the signposts to our souls. No more land to conquer, so our identities become the final frontier, the 50 star on your back. Your American names spell out barbed wire fences around our own histories. What we have left after we forsake what's us last linked to a culture considered too foreign, too alien, human. You have always feared names, passed laws to prevent us from marrying outside our race, as if our last names would spread forest fires, ripping through family trees. Betty, your voice reminds me of every ESL teacher who thought my slit eyes were accent marks on my face. At school, they taught me that my name was not Jaehyun. They said, your name is Brian. And day by day, I forgot the meaning of my family name, Willow Tree. Learned the beauty in my own name. Now there is a grave buried in the back of my throat, filled with Korean words like lifeless bodies. Most mornings, my mouth feels half empty, and old family videos make me cringe when I see myself speaking in tongues, the language of a forgotten God. I can't even speak to my own grandmother anymore. There are visitors at home. Every dinner time is a moment of silence for a murdered language. I'm one in my family who can't speak Korean fluently. A branch chopped off the willow tree. I can't even pronounce my own name properly. Every night, with the face of a million mustard seeds, I speak to the stars, searching clouds like lottery tickets, waiting for the sky to speak back to me like remembrance, like forgiveness. And I will walk to the river, plant my family name in a mountain soil till a willow grows, and we will both weep away our history until there are no words left to speak. The words Ryan to assert the violence comes with ending the erasure of Black, Indigenous, and students of color, demanding that we become more palatable and translate ourselves in the service of white supremacy, and to call us to the responsibility of understanding our own complicity in this kind of. And so I'm aware that the DDOE has some guiding principles seeking to push everyone forward in this work. And in order for us to make sure that we are not just language justice, not just lip service, that this is not performative equity, then there are some things that we're going to have to do in order for us to make this real, in order for us to embrace an abolitionist mindset, in order for us to disrupt and dismantle and reimagine and build the world that we all need and need. And so I want to start with the first guiding principle, which speaks to being asset-based and clearly relevant, right? One with all the principles is I've invited you to think about an entry point for that work. And so to say that there's a need asset-based and culturally relevant in the work that I've done as a scholar, as a community engaged organizer and practitioner and educator, is to think about what that means by resisting centered narratives. And this is the illustration I want to bring to you when I talk about what it means to resist damage narratives. This is an image that comes from the work of Gonzalez. He has a series called the Erased Lynching series. And this series was brought to my attention for the first time by Eve Tuck, who is speaking in her work about the power of resistance, calling us in, those of us who believe ourselves to be on the side of equity and justice, calling us in to the responsibility of resisting damage-centered narratives by bringing this picture to our attention. This is actually an image of a lynching, of a very famous lynching in America. And if you look up the series, you'll see a range of them. And what the artist has done is remove body from the lynching scene. Because as moving the body, what we notice is people on the ground. Typically, we see a lynching scene, we're so enamored or engrossed by the gruesomeness of the body, and we don't see people who are perpetrating the crime. Eve Tuck uses this as a parallel to help us think about the way that when we go about this work, equity and justice and resistance, we often do so by honing in, be fixated and the brokenness and the trauma, particularly of Black and brown people, don't pay attention to the systems that are perpetrating the crime. If you look at this image, you would never know that this is a lynching scene, the way that the crowd is so casual. There's a guy standing there with his arm. There is a lynched body on that tree. Trying to know how patchy our institutions and our systems exist while there's so much harm and so much pain being enacted on particular communities, right? And so the ways that we perpetuate this often is when we start to frame young people as at risk, saying no child will be left behind. We have language that talks about giving young people voice as if they were voiceless before they encountered us. The damage-centered narrative is the exact opposite of an asset-based approach. It's the kind of narrative that renders Black and brown young people broken by nature of their existence outside of the validation of white supremacy. It's the kind of narrative that centers so much on the pain of what's going on, not mentally who are perpetuating them. And so it's really crucial for us to think about that. Like, I am very, Dr. J, not the one sheet. Like, I don't got a sheet for justice. That's not how this goes. I'm the kind of person that's trying to inspire commitment and character of transformation in each and every person that's in attendance today. What does it look like to actualize this in our thinking and in our perspectives and our paradigms? I want us to see the world through the equity and justice, right? And so it's not that I am coming here saying, here are the 5 steps toward justice, the 5 steps towards equity, the 5 towards making sure that you're being linguistically affirming. What I'm saying is that we have to interrogate our own paradigms, perspectives, and in doing so, we all become about this work. We all tap into that imagination of what it means to operate fully in active areas of influence in the service of justice. And so this is a perspective to say, in every single thing I do, especially when I'm working with young people who come in with power of their names and their language, their identity, that this school is asking them to erase, translate, or I will resist the centered narrative that's to fit that, or think something is broken, undone, or not enough, unless it aligns with middle class values. And so that asset-based and culturally relevant work has to start there. It has to start with resisting that. And so the next standard, the next principle is about rigorous opportunities, rigorous opportunities to learn, right? Grade level. And what I want us to think about, because the word rigorous is loaded, the word rigorous has historically been laden with white supremacist logic, is how we enact this by challenging white supremacist logics of rigor. And so as we think about that, I'm thinking about the work of Ciphers for Justice that came up in the reading of my biography. And the work of Ciphers for Justice resists traditional ways of knowing by censoring the logics of in the work of schooling. And so what I do when I work with teachers is that every semester that I teach educators on topics ranging from diversity to racial justice to achievement in urban schools, I make sure to include a unit on the cipher. For those who don't know, over 3% of urban educators are not people of color and live outside of the racially diverse communities where their students reside. So I bring in the cipher, a practice with pop culture with West African roots. Essentially, it's a circle of people who come together to share an extemporaneous or fully written ideas over a beat to exhibit mastery, lyrical and rhetorical dexterity, sometimes in the African tradition of signifying. So every semester for some years now, I've taught these teachers some fundamental skill hip hop writing so that they dare participate in the art of the cipher. And every semester I witness exact patterns during the lesson. In a nutshell, panic. The beat is in the background. I watch the hesitation and anxiety in the room reach a boiling point. I lower the music to invite some truth. honest reflection about what is being felt, vulnerability, fear of failure, discomfort about being inauthentic. My lines suck. These are the feelings that are agreed upon in the room. It is at this point when I can see the anxious excitement of some and fear and shame in the eyes of others that I ask, how many of your students do you label illiterate societal standards while they can demonstrate mastery over the cognitive form that intimidates you in this cipher? How inauthentic it must feel for them to every day participate in practices that regard their own as inferior. I tell this 83% that for marginal peoples, a truly diverse society is not about simply including dominant culture. I tell them that I am a repository of transnational conflict. Have you ever endured the duty of feeling like both victim and convict? Have you ever endured the shame of mixing your words with your thoughts like, Professor, this author purports that sometimes hegemonic forces are forced to use degrees of fabrication, and I be thinking the same thing, so I don't know why they be hating. This may sound just another case of English, but I be as broken as the records of our history, so be broken record. I be that broken record. Can you see my lines? I tell them that the process towards diversity is not just about the presence of difference. It is about creating spaces and opportunities for truly esteeming and exploring the value of difference on its own terms. You see, proper standard is not that we are incapable of acquiring. It is that we so often fail to incorporate the genius that is available within diverse cultures. And when I am to be like you, then I am robbed, and you are robbed of the fullest potential of me. I start there, this conversation about what it truly means to challenge white supremacist logics of rigor. Because the work that I do with educators, we don't understand the level of linguistic dexterity and the cognitive complexity that goes into the everyday realities of the young people that we serve. That goes in language practices, the translanguaging, all of the language practices. Young people need places where they take refuge outside of our classrooms, have power and rigor that we again render useless or inferior through the lens of white supremacy. And so if we're going to engage in these principles in a way that's not performative, in a way that doesn't reify oppression, in a way that really breaks free logics of injustice that have previously informed the harm of sin, then we need to invest in a true understanding of the power and the vigor that exists already organically in the everyday lives of the young people that we serve. And this feeds really directly into the next principle of building learners' autonomy and what it means by affirming and the mystery of multiple practices that they bring into the room. My time writing 3 Ways to Speak and ask questions about what is the relationship between language, race, and power. I encountered the work of Dr. Geneva. One of the people decades ago who started to make connections between African American language features and how they directly onto West African language features, and went on to write paper to publish so much scholarship in African English, right? With the understanding and the assertion that this is a rule-governed, powerful, creolized English, transcended and transcended the oppressions that have been imposed by the dispersion of our people. Today, the April Baker powerfully on that to talk about linguistic justice. Same way that these linguistic practices must be nourished and affirmed, sustained in the everyday lives of our students. So a lot of times when we have this conversation, we have the conversation in the context of what it means to equip our students for the real world. Real world means that standard English is a real world means that if young people are affirmed in who they are not and don't perform and into whiteness, they will not get jobs. They will get college access because standard English is the language of power. But what is true instead is that standard English is of the power, because I know very well that every one of my language practice has power. I knew that already, but I know it more so because I constantly watch, as examples here, as corporations and mainstream media will co-opt and utilize my language practices while telling me in school this and inferior and ghetto and ratchet. So I one day am stifling the Black language practices out of our children in school, only to use that same Black language to monetize your brand and gain mass appeal. If a conversation about building learners' autonomy, what happens when you are, especially when it comes to language and literacy, if you're really trying to the autonomy of a reader and a writer, what needs to happen in that process is that you demystify the cognitive tools that go into engaging in a particular literacy practice. If I want you to decode this particular message, then someone who already has autonomy over being able to decode a particular message, a text, there are some metacognitive skills that are going on that they're applying to the text to make meaning. And the way that we make those skills visible is by demystifying that process. What are they doing? They're chunking, they're rereading, they're skills that they're applying in order to make sense of the text. But what does it mean to demystify and tap the metacognitive conversation that's happening in a language practices, powerful and rule governed and valid, as I showed before, and cognitively complex, so much so that educators find themselves struggling to write hip hop writing? How do we do that work to build autonomy and affirm the identities and the language practices that young people already have, so that when we want them to acquire other language practices, not hierarchy or superior, but those that coexist in our world, right? Culturally, teaches us about the difference between hierarchy and pluralism. But if hierarchy, it's that the forms of English that we standardize in school are inherently evil. It's the historical and indoctrinate those language practices as hierarchical that render them evil. And so what happens when we take the time to understand the power and the rigor and the cognitive complexity that comes with varieties and identities and practices and ways of knowing that our bring into the we have the capacity to build their autonomy over their linguistic power, their own literate identities. And then they get to bring that into a space, map that on to anything that they want into, because they're that powerful. And lastly, because I know I'm near time now, the last principle is about assessment for learning. And I want us to think about this through a refusal of white colonial logics of evaluation and stratification, because that's all I hear when I hear assessment. When I hear assessment, I hear white colonial logics of evaluation and stratification. That's what I hear, right? And not for no reason, because we have a history of policing language, of policing identity, of policing standardized and canonized in our schools along the lines of race and class and gender. Like, we do that, right? But then we present it as those ideologically neutral, normal, and we need to give everybody access to the language of power, AKA language. So I'm showing this little history here because for some reason that I'm still not sure, in undergrad, I ended up studying like Old English. I don't know what happened, but I had encountered the work of Chaucer and many other old authors, and was bewildered to learn that there are so many words that seem familiar to us today, particularly as a Black young person here in America, in my context, corrected for acts instead of ask. So I was bewildered to learn that the word used to be ask. Are you serious now? Which like really fed into this question, like how are we making this controlling this language happening, right? And so, and to know that in the time of Chaucer, English was not the language, and people like Chaucer popularized it. That says language is a living thing. We can feel it changing. Parts of it become old, they are forgotten. Pieces bud out, spread into leaves, and become branches proliferating. So when we think about what it means to assess, we have to understand that assessment, especially when it comes to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, exists in this conversation of colonialism, settler colonialism, imperialism, and slavery. That means that we're complicit in that stratification process of basically measuring how close are you in proximity to white supremacy so that you can have some social mobility. That's pretty much what it has been. And so this transatlantic slave trade is very much the beginning of that, the white man's burden of going to the continent of Africa and saying, you know, these are there's barbaric language and darkened skin and barbaric cultures that we need to contain and control and exploit, right? And we need to fit a burden to enlighten these people. And at the Berlin Conference of 1884, centuries later, as if that wasn't enough, this conference where European nations came together to divide up the continent of Africa for imperialism and colonialism. And this is why you'll see all across the continent of Africa, people engage in these various language practices. But what happens in colonized spaces is that when the colonizers come, the colonizers impose their language. And so Ngugi wa Thiong'o speaks about this in his work. I bring him up as much as I possibly can. In such an important moment in my life, to know that in colonial Kenya, what is important is that the language of our evening teach-ins and the languages of our community, our immediate community, and the language of our work in the field were one. And this is where, right, before the counter, and then I went to school, a colonial school, harmony was broken. The language of my education was no longer the language of culture. He says, Berlin of 1884, the fact of the sword and the bullet, but the night of the sword and the bullet was followed by the morning of the chalk and the was the means of physical subjugation. Language was the means of spiritual subjugation. When I show this, I make sure to emphasize that we understand that the sword was wielded soldiers, but the chalk blackboard, spiritual subjugation by the colonizers, that was enforced by the teachers. Teachers were complicit in ensuring students were physically beaten for speaking tongues, for engaging in their cultural practices, so that when they went home to their communities, they understood that it was not appropriate for them to be who they are. And I commit to you that that's the same thing that we're complicit in today in our classrooms. And so I know I'm out of time. Okay, I'm almost done. I wanna just close out talking about the power of what I call a vision-driven justice, meaning that principles about to take in a not performative way. It's labor that is directly connected to your duty as someone's ancestor. In history, you're literally creating the world that generation are going to inherit. And so the decisions that we make fall into the spirit of this quote on Ava DuVernay's shirt. I am my ancestors' dreams. I am standing in the sacrifices, freedoms, and choices of my ancestors, that I now have dreams. It will mean to be someone's ancestor one day. right? So when we think about what it means to take up this work, we got to take it up with that kind of orientation, understanding that there are some things that need to be dismantled. And so when I think about my wild dreams, what I've done, I've embraced what I've called a liberation literacies pedagogy that really understands that because language is not just words, it's a site of culture and history and politics and ideologies and identity. Sustaining the complex linguistic identities of BIPOC youth as an act of resistance, it pushes us to divest from white colonial logic. It evokes and affirms youth interests, socio-political realities, and identities that are otherwise invisible to those who choose not to listen. It destabilizes ideological hierarchies. It demands participatory action because it's not just about the knowing, it's about the knowing and the doing and the knowing and the doing, right? And how those interact. And it literally, quite literally, authors new futures. Thank you so much for allowing me to spend time today. I am deeply grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Lyiscott, thank you so much for this powerful history lesson, really, in so many ways. Just really, really powerful and thoughtful and important. It was really important to see the different aspects. The panel that we had just prior to this did a very similar approach in unpacking and looking at what does it take, what the questions were about, what does it take to really do this, and starting with the self is so important. Thank you so much. There's just chats coming in, amazing and powerful. I would rather hand it over to folks in the room. Do you have a question? Is there anything that, it was a little bit choppy partway a couple times, so there might be some questions about specific things with like certain aspects. So we'll make sure that that we get some of those questions too if they don't get tackled here. But I was riveted. Amazing.
Could you see my slides in there?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. And the videos played too. The videos were,
okay, cool.
They played through too. They were great.
Okay. I'm sorry that it was choppy, the Wi-Fi. Oh my God. But please, I'm here for the questions, here to answer as much as as much as time allows.
Absolutely. And feel free to jump in too. This is a place where you can jump in and unmute yourself and ask, or put your question in the chat if you feel comfortable doing that too. So many thank yous coming in.
I mean, while y'all are considering some questions, I want you, I want to, I'm sorry, I should have shared this before. Invite you to attend an upcoming event that for the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research that I'm co-director. We're having an amazing launch event. Dr. Bettina Love and Cynthia Dillard are going to be like our headliners, but we'll have youth workshops, educator workshops. It's going to be a blast. It's 3 days. It's free. So please, this is the registration page. Please feel to pull up. Love to have you.
That's exciting. Oh, Dana's on. Hi, Dana.
Are we still taking questions?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, Shelly.
Hi. Thank you so much for this. I was screaming. I'm glad I was on mute. This was so inspiring. I work for Delaware State University. I'm the chair for education programs there, and I have a bunch of questions for you. But I guess for starters, that opportunity that you just mentioned sounds like it answers part of my question, which is just what opportunities and where can I start with some ways that I can engage with the faculty of the teacher prep programs at Delaware State University. And then I would love to follow up with you about ways that we can begin to look at the curriculum that we have for our teacher prep programs and think of, in fact, our department meeting this morning, we were just talking about where we can actually make sure that we're very purposeful and not narrowing this content to 1 or 2 courses. So what advice do you have for us to making this part of the program overall and not just narrowing these conversations to a course, for example, you know, a multicultural education type course?
For that question, the other day that said, America is not prepared for anything but war. And it was in response to the crisis that happened in Texas. And it really related with me because I was like, yo, don't nobody have to ask America, how should we go to war? That never comes up, right? In our everyday lives, because we are deeply entrenched in the logic of capitalism, our everyday lives is embedded with capitalism. Everything that we do, see, what the air we breathe is capitalism, right? Drives us. When we decided to name the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engagement, option to name it the Center for Racial and Youth Engaged Research. We decided to name it the Center of as a way to name how we are embodying this work. It is who we are, right? And so it informs our way of being and living in the world. And that's the best answer I can give, that this is not side work, bullet points or checklists. When we think about our ancestors and what they had to do, they had way less tools, right? But you gotta be about freedom. You gotta be about this. And it should saturate everything that you, it shouldn't be a part of a program or a set of principles in this one area. No, this is how do we become of it, right? And so that's my best answer. I want us to have a character and identity of justice that manifests itself in every single thing that we do.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
I was like, all this time, y'all talk to me. Come on. I'm here for it. Yes. Checking the pulse of social justice should be on the agenda of every faculty meeting. We institutionalize whatever we value. I'll tell you that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
Please, I've been talking. You go ahead.
Oh, I'm like, because I'm a Chinese teacher, I'm a Chinese immersion teacher at middle school here in Delaware. And I just realized that because of our previous President Trump, and also the recent like anti-Asian hate, just you know, it's the general climate is not very friendly to people from China. And I've seen like a pushback, from, I don't know how to say it, but it's kind of a pushback against learning the Chinese language.
Yeah.
But as a person who has been living in America for a long time and who also came from China and knows a lot of the things there, you know, my personal understanding is that foreign language is super important because kids there start to learn English at a very young age, and they know so much about America. But here, you know, if you choose to be ignoring what's happening there and not even want to learn the language, you know, think about what the future will be look like, you know, between these two superpowers. So my question is, you know, what might be your advice, you know, considering, you know, the current climate, you know, how can me as an educator of Chinese languages, you know, kind of just, you know, do my part, or how can I make a change? It's sometimes really depressing, honestly. Yeah.
I appreciate your authenticity. I want to name that regardless of what's going on with these two superpowers, Chinese children deserve to learn their languages no matter what. Because it's a beautiful part of identity, their histories, and their, regardless of what the future holds, right? That's your history. That is so important to that wholeness. And so what I said, that it's really hard, and we know, I have something that I say very often, that social without purpose, that in as much as you to do to make sure that you're grappling with your own healing so that you can show up unapologetically in your identity, the young people around you will witness. Because we know first, young people are affirmed in and validated and grow in their own home language practice, they can better acquire knowledge. Attempting to eradicate people's language practices make it harder for them to map onto other practices. So it's not even logical based on research. With that, I would love to know, because I know we got some healing to do. At the center, we have a racial healing collective. What is that internal thing that you're navigating that the young, because we grow up unapologetically in the power of language, of your voice, of your culture, it's testimony, right? Because something that they understand is superpower. I want everything to do with it. You know, without knowing too much, I would want to encourage you to start there. To start with that pain that you're naming, and to not that I have to do social justice work out here without that personal wellness work in, because Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. And self-love looks like in private is a radical act in the work of justice. Other young people that look like you and feel like you need models for navigating this stuff in a way well and healing and powerful and whole. So there's something very revolutionary about that. I hope that value to the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Mrs. Saunders. Sorry, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for all of that you're sharing. Can you see me and hear me?
I can, hi.
Hi. So I want to ask a very uncomfortable question, and that is that, so I understand the onus of finding out about my biases as a member of a quote majority race and culture, coming from colonist background. I know the onus is on me, but I wonder if you have anything to say to where one could start and where one could continue to look at how their bias and the damage done in the past translates to their personal day. In other words, how much and where does it come from, where my particular biases are. I don't mean, should I ask anybody? I mean, I know that I should ask people. But beyond that, is there another layer to that you can add? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally understand. Have you, when was the first time in your schooling that you read a book by a brown author? Remember?
I'm unsure, and I'll tell you why. If there was a Black or brown author, or an author of anyone besides the white race, it wasn't maybe pointed out to me in a way that I remember it. Number two, the first one that I remember was in my college years. That doesn't mean that there was none before that.
Okay. I like to end in similar questions here, that there are perspectives and worlds and ways of knowing that exist on in mainstream curriculum of schooling, that accessing those other ways of knowing and the embedded that organically, because supremacy anyway, across disciplines. I'm talking like literature and film and me talking everything, like be intentional exposing yourself to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right?
I'm still cutting out a lot.
Yeah, like, unfortunately it is. It's cutting out a lot now.
Oh no, hello here.
You
Yes.
are just cutting out a lot, and so I missed a lot of that great. I knew it sounded great, but I missed a lot of
I'm
it.
so sorry. It's the Wi-Fi. It's terrible here.
I know,
Okay.
it's the internet life.
Can I put my email in the chat, and maybe you can?
Please do. Please do.
That's a great idea.
Am I still cutting?
Yes, it went in and out, and then now it's back to worse again, unfortunately. Well, there's one last question for you. The title of the poem that you shared about was it one of your students?
No, I saw him at Brave New Voices and
yes.
poetry. Yeah. So there's no he did it. I can work home. I can email you the text.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. And Layla, I'll get that to you. Layla, my girlfriend Layla asked about that. All right.
And just email me. I'm so sorry for these internet issues, but grateful for the time that we were able to spend together. Thank you.
Grateful. So grateful. Thank you so much for being here. You're just an inspiration and a leader, and we thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Dr. J. Bye, Dana.
Thank you so much for your message and for helping really bring us into perhaps an uncomfortable zone, but where we can really grow and learn and keep thinking about the assets that our students bring to our schools and how to really capitalize them and ensure that they're being valued in their learning environment. So we really appreciate you coming here and being with us virtually this afternoon and closing us out after 2 days of tremendous learning for all of our participants. We've had over 400 participants throughout these 2 days engaged in sessions where we've talked about many, many different topics and all focused on how we can make sure that we're building on the assets of our learners and being culturally and linguistically responsive to the students that are in our classrooms and in front of us. So thank you so much for giving us that powerful ending and lots to think about. Greatly appreciate it.